we're going to conclude this talk about the primacy of St. Peter from the lecture that I gave at the end of last week, and just have some concluding thoughts. And then I want to deal with one more thing, which is the early church and the persecutions that begin. Okay, so remember, we were talking about St. Peter and his primacy. What does that mean, right? We're talking about the authority that Christ gave Peter and his successors, the popes, which was different than the authority he gave the 12. Remember, the 12, they receive authority, which we talked about last semester, right? That authority, right, to forgive sins, that authority to be leaders, right? They have unique authority. But what we talked about at the end of last week was that Christ gives Peter a very unique authority, right? In that role that we saw from the Old Testament of prime minister. And with that authority, right, that it continues on to his successors, right? Which are called eventually the popes, which is a name that is taken from the Roman idea and Roman culture, which is what sort of the emperor was called. The supreme bridge builder, the pontiff, the pope, which Christ's church takes on, right, in the spiritual way. Who's the supreme bridge builder? Christ, and he gives that authority, right, to Peter and his successors. So what we mean by primacy of Peter is that among the 12, right, Peter has a unique role as that prime minister of the 12 ministers of Christ in the new kingdom, right, that compares, fulfills, and completes and perfects the old kingdom in that spiritual way. Okay? So that's what we mean by primacy. Peter and his successors get unique authority by Christ. Right? So remember, that office of Peter, prime minister, we compare to the Old Testament, Isaiah 22, right, starting in verse 19. New Testament, the same idea, right, taken from the 12 keys of the kingdom, the sign of the office, which we see all the way to today. Look up the Vatican flag, and what do you have? You've got two colors, yellow and white, and you've got right there keys, right, as the sign. Look above the church of St. Peter's, there it is with the dome, and smack dab, right, what is it? It's the keys of the kingdom, right, the sign of the office of Peter from the very beginning. All right, continuing on then. He's also called the vicar of Christ. What does that mean? It means that St. Peter and his successors possess the authority of the king himself. Right, the vicar, we looked it up in one class, substitute, right? Someone who stands in for, right? So the vicar, right, that guy that is not the king, but is there put up by the king, right, to sit in his place while the king is somewhere else, Christ in heaven, right? The extent of Peter's authority then over the church from the very beginning, right, is an authority coming from Christ that isn't like partial whatever, but it is a full, supreme, and universal authority, right, over the 12, and so over the whole church. Make sure we have that down. That's a key point, that Peter and his successors, the popes, exercise an authority given by Christ that we see here at the beginning, right, that is complete, full, supreme, and universal. Not over some one part of the church, specifically, let's say, this place in Rome or some place in Egypt or whatever, but over the whole entire universal church, right? The 12 spread all over the world, right? And who has the supreme authority over the whole 12? Peter, right, and his successors. Okay? We get that. Remember the Old Testament, he will be a father to all the inhabitants of Israel, right? That whole idea, right? Not just a section, but the whole thing. So the role of the papacy over time, the role of Peter's successors over time, has evolved politically and socially as circumstances surrounding the church have changed. Okay? So politically, socially, the role of the Pope has changed. He used to have land that he had to protect. Now they have no land, right? The Vatican State is so small in the middle of Italy, and so it's all about spiritual stuff now. But that's changed. What's remained constant since the time of Peter today is that he's the church's highest moral authority, right? He's the church's highest doctrinal authority that we see from the Council of Jerusalem, which we'll talk about who stands up and gives the proclamation of the church, the definitive doctrine for the entire worldwide church to follow, is Peter, who gives that proclamation. When a disagreement arises, the Pope then has the authority to resolve and clarify matters of faith and morals. Again, what we see in the Council of Jerusalem and Acts of the Apostle of St. Peter, right? Maintains the unity of the faith. That's his role, right? So these things we see are constants from Peter all the way down to 2014. Concluding, we'll have study questions 7 through 9. If you want to read something about this role, letter of St. Clement. He's writing in 90 AD. St. Clement is a pope, a successor of Peter. 90 AD, right? Very soon after. And he writes in his letters to the whole church from that chair of St. Peter, which we just celebrated this week on Saturday. How neat. The chair of St. Peter, which is all about that authority of Peter. And so that's what it's all about. So read St. Clement and you get a good idea of what it means about successors, his role as shepherding of the whole church, him trying to lift up the church and address problems and situations. And how you can see, has an idea that he's not addressing just where he is, the people in Rome, but he's addressing from Rome to the entire world, to the entire church, right? Recognizing his authority and his role as the shepherd, the father figure to all the inhabitants, like from the Old Testament, of the new kingdom, which is the church, right? We'll conclude it right there. The next video will be on martyrdom and persecutions.